This is Toronto, Canada's iconic city. Like most fast-growing global cities, owning an apartment, leave alone a house here, is a dream or perhaps a nightmare. Buyers are being pushed into bidding wars, not just to own but even to rent a property. To make it worse, the central bank's struggle to control inflation and so increase interest rates has had a negative impact on affordability. In a decade, residential mortgage rates have shot up from an average 2.70% to this year's brutal 6.40%. However, a quick Google search reveals there is no one standard rate. Ironically, the commercial lending rate, again a Google search reveals, is sometimes just a notch higher at 6.70% and sometimes as low as 2.2%. So it's but natural that investors continue to pump in money into Toronto's booming condo industry. In fact, Toronto is emerging as the condo king of the world, with most condos owned by investors, stymieing ordinary Torontonians' dreams. High rents are pushing many to live on streets and buses and trains. Out of a total population of 38.25 million, the homeless, if official statistics can be relied upon, is 235,000 and growing. In Toronto, for every 10,000 people, 30 are homeless. Your name?
Oh, my name's Patrick.
How do you spell that?
P-A-T-R-I-C-K.
B-A-G-R-S-E-K?
No, P-A-T-R-I-C-K.
And Patrick, how long have you been homeless and what got you to the streets?
I'm homeless all my life, and the fact that society is a big problem. Everybody frowns upon those who can't make it, and people that do make it apparently frown on those who don't. And because you don't make it, or you don't stand up to their standards, they frown upon you. Because you have issues. Everybody has a crutch, everybody has a struggle, everybody has a downfall, everybody copes differently, everybody has a different symptom, everybody has a different illness, whether it's mental, physical, or even emotional. Like people go through abuse, otherwise their parents abuse them, their siblings abuse them, their spouses abuse them, their partners, and even sometimes themselves abuse themselves. And it's troubled people that are most likely to not succeed, and the ones that do are the ones that...
The poverty rate in 2018 was 11% based on Canada's official poverty line. This means that 3.98 million Canadians, or 1 in 9, were living in poverty in 2018. In Toronto, for every 10,000 people, 30 are homeless. There was a slight dip in the housing market this year, raising expectations of a downward trend. But as my interview with realtor Victoria Stone of Remax Excel reveals, that may just be a blip on the radar screen. Is it a momentary blip in the market that it's rising again, or do you see this as a continual trend of rising? Because there are a few gloomy forecasts out there about the housing market.
Yeah. So on one hand, I honestly believe that the market will not go down based on the fact that Canada's population is declining, and so for that reason we heavily rely on immigration. So our economy is like, it's necessary for us to, continue as a country. So in that case, we are rolling out the red carpet and basically asking people we genuinely have an industry in that of going out and getting people and recruiting people and like asking other people to come live in Canada. For that reason, I do think that the supply that we have is going to see a little bit more demand in the next coming years, because we, now that COVID is behind us, well, hopefully, yeah, that I think that the, border is going to open up and immigration is going to cause a massive impact in that.
But Victoria, there's always the sense of, the markets are not doing very well, economy, people's affordability is a big factor here.
Absolutely.
And the inflation and the interest rates are being hiked every time by the central bank just to keep inflation low. So the money supply in the market is lesser. That's a huge concern, and there is a school of thought which says that these prices are artificially kept high. What's your take on that?
So I do agree that in terms of the interest rate affecting the market, it does massively. However, I believe that the Bank of Canada is going to keep those rates reasonable because our economy literally rests, like, we need real estate in order to have a healthy economy. If our real estate really did take a massive hit and start to go down, that would affect us as a country, each and every citizen. So I don't think the Bank of Canada will allow that to happen. In terms of artificial value, I do think that when it was about 2-3 years ago, and it was basically the kind of market where anybody could, like a rundown shack, someone could put like a for sale sign and it would have multiple offers. In that way, that did drive prices up quite a lot. I think that did impact our market quite a lot as well. It does make it quite difficult for first-time buyers and for people to get into the market. However, there are still quite a lot of affordable ways to, get your foot in the door. For one thing, if you're going to look for real estate inside of a city, you are going to pay quite a lot more versus if you go on the outskirts. And I always say this too, if you live in the city, it literally takes you an hour to get anywhere. Or alternatively, you could live a little bit outside of the city, still take the same amount of distance and travel, and pay like quite a significant amount less for your home. Also, another alternative is condos. I know it's not ideal for people, but if you get into a condo, especially pre-construction, you pay a really reasonable price, and then, reasonable in context, because I do agree the prices are quite high and it does make it very difficult. But in terms of getting into a condo, making that your first step, it may not be your dream home, but you're building equity, and then you spend a few years there, sell it, and then you get to buy your dream home.
Would you disagree completely with the fact that condos, there are, like in many other parts of the world, condo buildings are not completely occupied, that housing has become not a necessity but a means of investment for the rich?
Well, I do agree with that, and I do think that that's been pretty much as old as time sort of thing. Like, there are multiple reasons to buy real estate, and one of those reasons quite largely is for investment. And whether you're buying it to live in or to invest in, either way you're building equity. And anyone will tell you that buying in real estate is the best investment you can make. It's better than putting money into the stock market. It's better than going to Las Vegas. You can make money. Yeah. It's very sound. And even when there are dips and lulls in the market, if you look at it over a 10-year span, big picture wise, you will increase the equity always. So, I don't want to say always, but in Canada, I do believe it is a very, very safe investment.
You know what? In Ontario takes the cake because, correct me if I'm wrong, it's also a federal decision or not. They do not want to disperse the population around Canada. Ontario has become such an overcrowded center. What if suddenly the government decides, no, it's untenable to have so many immigrants just flock to Ontario? The rest of the country needs to fill up holes, and what impact would it have?
One of the things that I think is really interesting is media doesn't really report honestly in terms of real estate, which is a very sad thing because it is such a necessary thing, and I believe that it's a disservice to the citizens to report it in such a salacious way. The fact is, Canada is a massive country, and we are so incredibly underpopulated. It's a joke. We literally could fit our entire population in one city of Japan. It's insane. So if you really want to put it in a scale kind of thing, like, please, all of the immigrants, like, come to Canada. Like, it is open for business. Like, in terms of, you know, bottlenecking it and having like centralized areas, having a bigger growth than others, I believe that that is actually an issue in terms of resources. We need to be able to provide ESL classes, support for newcomers across the board, not just in city hubs. I think if that was something that we did, that would very much help. I do agree with you that like cities are becoming crowded, but I don't think that that's really such a huge issue in terms of like immigration, more so the fact that people want to be where you have entertainment, you have, you know, shopping, you have, you know, schools are better. Like, it just sort of, I personally am a fan of rural. I live in Pickering, so I love to be somewhere where there's ravines and I can like walk. It's very walkable. I do love the city as well, but in terms of spreading out, I think that it's personal taste and personal choice.
So if I can interpret you correctly, the government needs to do more in terms of building infrastructure.
Correct.
And so you builders would go there, or should it be vice versa, that the builder goes, chooses a faraway, location, and then asks the government, how does it work?
I think
in
it's
Canada?
the government that should actually take the lead on it, because builders, those are the investors. Those are the people who are basically trying to make as much money as possible. It is a business, and so builders are going to go where the majority of people are and where the people want to be, which generally are cities or a larger population area. They're not going to go onto the outskirts, which in a weird way, it actually is economically more sound because the land is cheaper for them. However, you need to get those buyers. And so, for example, in Pickering, we have 75 different developments for condos right now. It's absolutely crazy. I support development that is sound, that is like, you know, you've got to do the due diligence, you've got to research. For example, there's some condos that are going in really close to elder home, and they did a score for the test to see, you know, if it would be possible to have that infrastructure, to have that many new residents live there. And the intersection got an F, it failed. They're still going forward with the development, however, so it's unfortunate. I did actually go to City Hall, our City Hall, and like talk about that, because, you know, it would be wonderful if developments happened a little bit outside, and that would promote growth as well. But the support has to be there for the growth to develop. And so it's like a double-edged sword. But I do think that it comes down first to government. Government needs to make sure there's hospitals, make sure that there's great schools, make sure that there's sidewalks, that it's actually developed, and that there can be these sites planned and built there.
So do you see that happening in Ontario, or do you see them?
I think it's necessary, and anything that's necessary will eventually happen. I think that it would be very short-sighted if it wasn't done in that way. But it's become quite difficult for people to secure mortgages. It used to be like 5-10 years ago, if you knew someone, you know, and you looked good on paper, and you could like, you know, show, you know, it was a lot easier for people to secure mortgages. Whereas now, it doesn't matter who you know, it doesn't matter how, like, you know, you could put together the strongest case, and the bank could still reject you, which is very, very unfortunate, because one of the biggest discrepancies I think that we have in real estate is the fact that, for example, someone who rents a property, and let's be honest, rent right now, it's really gross how high it is. In fact, somebody who pays rent on average, let's say you have a 2 or 3 bedroom home, or even a condo, you're looking at like $2,500, $3,000 a month.
Absolutely.
So you have $2,500, $3,000 that you're paying in rent. If you went to a bank and you said, "Hi, I've been paying this rent consistently, I've never been late, I've got good credit, I can afford a mortgage half of that amount," the bank would still reject. Like, it's to me a very unfair situation. I think that the bank should actually make it easier and more accessible for people, like the common average working class person to be able to get into the housing market because of what a great investment it is. And I do think that it's unfortunate that it's been made so difficult.
Yeah, the reason I'm again asking you this question is because the government or the Bank of Canada has to look at inflation, but while it's looking at inflation and trying to curtail inflation, it's just axing the first time or even the repeat home buyers, because as they control inflation, they are hiking up interest rates, making the stress test to buy property more difficult. So what's the way out?
I'm probably not the right person to ask about this because I'm anti-capitalist, and so in my head, for real, I believe that inflation is theft. I believe inflation is made up, it's imaginary. When you have people like Galen Weston saying like, oh, it's so hard, like cheese and milk and bread, the cost has gone up, it reminds me of like Futurama, the specific, anyway, I'm not going to get into it, but basically in terms of that sort of situation, I think that the interest rates, like, it is in the best interest of our society for citizens to do well financially, period. And that's what I'll say about it.
Yeah, because now it's come to a situation where homelessness has increased so much. Massively. And big builders are not willing to take on affordable housing because there's lesser profitability. It's a government
Well, that's
sector.
it. When you have a capitalist business, when you have a business where your goal is literally to make money and to profit, it's a sickness, and it's unfortunate that people will suffer as a result for it. But I do genuinely believe in our country in the way that we have a lot of services, a lot of policies, a lot of affordable housing, more so than I think many other countries. I love Canada. I think Canada does very well for its people, but there are people in place that make it more difficult and that are, pulling strings that are creating it to be more difficult than it needs to be. I do think that in time that will change because the majority will win, I believe, personally. So, I mean, that's all I can hope for. But yeah, in terms of like, it's sad because it's always been that way where it's like the few that hold the control and have the power do make decisions over, the majority. But I do think that the majority, they have the power if they stand up and say, like, enough is enough. And I think that, you're seeing things like in France, they're rioting and protesting and they're, like, literally in the streets and, like, good for them. That's what needs... I don't want to say, like, everyone, like, revolt or anything, but I am saying that it is a right. I took in school human rights and politics, and, like, that's something that's very important to me. I took housing and homelessness, and I think that housing is a right. Fundamentally, it is a right. And so when you're, not to mention too, like Canada's population, like I said at the beginning, is aging.
Yes.
So you have a population that's going to be very vulnerable. And this population was actually quite comfortable. This is the population that had, vacations and, the single income family. And so I think that changes absolutely need to be made. And the sooner the better, and I do think that the tide is turning in that way. I know that things seem bleak right now, but yeah, I hope that it's gonna change.
What about investments for big companies like yours getting people to invest or investors to build from scratch the condos? Where is it coming from? Because it's a competitive market. It's like the stock market. You have investors coming from all over the world. I've seen some Indian names here who are actually, putting in investments into building condo buildings or apartment buildings.
Yeah, well, I mean, the only...
Is it competitive enough? That's my question. Is investment in housing or condo building competitive enough, or...
Yeah, no, I think that it's a healthy market. There's definitely other markets that are, better to invest in or more profitable, and that's why it's good to have a real estate agent to help you figure out where the best place to go is, kind of thing. The companies that we work with are all very reputable, have been, builders for, some of them like 70 years kind of thing. So like original kind of, I mean, it is very, very important to know who you're doing business with. And in terms of like whether it's competitive enough, I mean, it's always been competitive. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it should be, I don't really know how to answer that, sorry.